Anthony eats
Ben,
us again. We, we,
ciao.
we keep doing that. It's a habit, but it's a good habit. And I
Yes.
have a question for you again.
Yes.
Because you build all that cool stuff in your day job.
Yes.
I mean, we've played with REST APIs and all that a bit in the previous, and we've mostly used it for actually getting data out of REST APIs so
Correct.
far, which is pretty cool. And from an
Very cool.
application development standpoint, I would say it's a very important part. And as a data person, I would also agree to my own statement. But we've also we've
I
kind of
agree with
hinted.
myself.
I think I did a pretty good job here summarizing this. I mean, compared to 2 weeks ago when I was asking you for a summary that we had just given, but then again, in my defense, it was pretty hot that day.
Why
It
didn't you
was
just use
so
like a chat bot to give you a summary? Why do you need me?
there because, anyways, coming back to my question,
Yes.
can you show me something cool with REST APIs where we're not doing much with data, but more with processes or devices or something like that? I mean, I think
Sure.
that is kind of what you do when you're not running the booth.
When I'm not running the booth. Okay. So let's talk about kind of what we're going to do here today, Ben. So all of the devices in my day job, I work at Pure Storage, have a REST API, which means I can coordinate events from the database engine and now the storage platform, right? So I can use the external REST endpoint integration that came out at SQL Server 2025 and go and do things like take a snapshot or read performance data or do some advanced operations inside the storage platform and coordinate those events together. And it's actually not limited to just what we do at Pure Storage. You could also do this in Azure. I've previously blogged about using the T-SQL snapshot backup feature, both on Pure Storage arrays, but also in Azure storage as well. So you can
Uh-huh.
use this technique that we're talking about today in a couple of different places. But a couple things happened recently inside of what the Pure Storage platform does, and obviously SQL Server 2025. So SQL Server 2025 has the external REST endpoint integration. Pure Storage has the ability to add tags to objects. And recently, about a month ago, we released a new version of our operating system called Purity that allowed me to add tags to a thing called a protection group snapshot. And for database administrators, a protection group snapshot is a big deal because it's an immutable, consistent snapshot across a collection of volumes inside of our storage arrays. And so now when I come along and I take a snapshot, I can actually inject the data about the snapshot into the tags associated with that snapshot about the stuff that's in the snapshot, the database backup, right? Now, there's a whole thing about our snapshots backup. Okay, that's fine. We'll solve that problem another day. But now, inside the actual snapshot itself, I have the description of what's in the snapshot. So the DBA can come back later and say, hey, Pure Storage Flash Array, I need the latest snapshot for this database server for this database at this time, which really at that point in time, snapshots start to smell like backups. But again, we're not going to fry that fish today. So that's what I want
Hi,
to show you today.
Dennis.
Right. Well, that's what I want to show you today is how we're able to inject the metadata about the snapshot into the snapshot itself. And then that data actually will replicate to another array, both the actual data in the snapshot, but also the metadata. So now I have copies of my data in two different locations, maybe even a third location. Again, starts to smell like
Are you
backup when
trying
I
to
have,
sell me a third array here? Is
I
that what's
mean,
happening?
scan this QR
Because
code,
if you
man.
do, you're doing it very subtle. I'm buying.
I'm glad you're buying. So now I want to recognize that this is bleeding edge tech. Like this needs SQL Server 2025. It needs the latest version of Purity for our REST API. I get it, right? But I just kind of want to show the art of the possible, what we can do with all these cool new toys that we have to play with in our toy box. So let's get into the demo, Ben. Lots of
Cool.
code. So we're going to go pretty fast, focus on the concepts, not the syntax. Okay.
Just hit
Uh,
F5. It's going to run all
just
through in no time.
Well, it's VS Code, and I'm on a Mac. There's F5. I could do Control Command E and do the same thing, Ben. Haha.
Nice.
Yeah. So yeah, we're going to turn on the external REST endpoint feature for our system. It was already turned on, but I just wanted to highlight it, that particular code here.
Sure.
I'm going to set some variables. I have a 4 terabyte database. All the volumes, or excuse me, all the database files are on a set of volumes. I believe it's 4 for this particular database, or 5 actually. Those volumes are all placed in this thing called a protection group, which is that concept, that wrapper around those things that I take the snapshot of all the volumes at the same point in time. We're going to use the new T-SQL Snapshot backup feature from 2022 because I'm in love with it. Heart emoji. And when you take a snapshot backup with the SQL Server 2022 T-SQL Snapshot backup feature, it generates a backup header, and I want to save that and stick that somewhere. I'm going to put that in an object store in my environment. I have a bunch of other variables here that I'm going to set, just kind of track things like return codes, authentication tokens, and headers for the REST API, and do all those fun things that we need to track whilst we're going. In the Pure Storage platform, we'll need to authenticate to the array first. Here's my very secure statically coded API token. Shh, don't tell any of my friends. Obviously, you would want to store that in a credential store.
3B07A.
Scroll fast. So we pass that in. It generates a session token, right? We'll use that session token for the duration of our session. So that's what we're doing here on step 4. Is I'm just extracting that XAuth token out, which will then be used in all the subsequent calls. At this point in time, we're going to use alter database TPCC4T. That's my database name. I'm going to suspend for snapshot backup equals on. That's going to freeze the database for just write IOs, which is a pretty cool part of this feature because now reads can still happen and writes are going to give you pause. So you'll see them show up in a system as log writer rates. The duration of the freeze, I've seen it anywhere between 10 milliseconds and 100 milliseconds. It's also a function of how many dirty pages there are. You might have to run a checkpoint. Well, we'll run a checkpoint when I run this process. But to make that process faster, you can run a checkpoint and then freeze the database. So one of the things you could do there. Awesome. I have now, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to generate a bunch of metadata about what's occurring. So I'm going to read the instance name. I'm going to specify the backup type. I'm going to generate a string that represents the date or a date stamp. I'm going to have the location of the backup file we're going to send in the object, and there its URL there. And I'm going to build a payload of tags. And so here we can see in JSON, because it's required by law to use JSON everywhere possible now, that we're going to add these tags to the protection group snapshot object. And so in there, we're going to have the protection group that we're going to snapshot. We're going to say, you know what, when you take the snapshot, replicate it right away, which means I'll have 2 copies of the data in 2 different locations. And here's all the tags that we'll be adding to the snapshot, right? So now we take the snap, we stick the tags in there, we force it to replicate, the tags and the data go to another location. That all happens when I run this code here on line 88 with the external REST endpoint integration, right? Take the snapshot. Cool. Got some error checking and things like that. We read the snapshot name back out of the result. When we pass that API call in, it's going to return the snapshot name back. And then we will take what's called the metadata backup, which will write that into S3. So that's going to live in our platform. Just a quick talk around the metadata backup here. You don't need the metadata backup to recover the databases. Like on Pure Storage, you could actually just clone back the data, and the clone will be a recoverable database. But what you do lose is the ability to do point-in-time recovery, right? So obviously, you want to keep the backup metadata file around if you want to do point-in-time recovery. You can restore logs or build an availability group. But if you lose this file, you don't lose access to the data. Your recovery point just becomes the snapshot. So that gets written into our object store. That obviously is going to be protected, replicated, and things like that. At that point in time when that backup runs, the metadata backup, the database thaws. If something goes wrong, I have some error code here to catch and thaw the database if something bad happens. And also one last time as a check outside of a catch block to make sure that the database is not suspended again if anything else goes wrong in the system. And I'm going to read the error log. So let's go ahead, Ben, and run all this super duper fun code. Does a lot of
told
work.
you just hit F5. Or
You actually, well, they're fine. Just because of you, I'm just going to do that right there. Haha. So this goes ahead and runs all that code. It takes about 2.8 seconds to do everything, which I think is really cool. The actual freeze time, if you look here, goes from, let's see, I believe it is, so right about there. So 2.4 or 0.24 to 0.25. So pretty quick to do the snapshot backup. The other one in there was from a previous run of the demo. If I look at some of the output I have here, just kind of the debug code that's running along the way, we can see that the database is frozen. We can see the snapshot was created. We can see it was successful. We create the metadata only backup. The snapshot is a numeric index number 105 is that, right? So now what happened is we took the snap, tags are in, replicated to another array. And now I want to be able to ask the system, hey, come back later. I'm going to connect to the other array and say, hey, other array, give me the snapshot for this database server for this database name, right? All right, Ben. So let's get started with asking the question of the other array. What database do we have? We could run this code against the primary array, but I just wanted to highlight the fact that we can do this against the two different ones very easily. So our SQL instance name is this AEN SQL 25A. Our database name is that TPCC4T for the 4 terabyte database. We'll have to authenticate again. I'll jump past that. We'll get our XAuth token. We'll jump past that. But here I'm building a query string then that's going to ask the question, hey, go look at the tags in the environment where the SQL instance name equals the one from our parameter up top, which is AEN SQL 25A, where the database name equals the database that we specified, which is TPCC4T, and give me all of those sorted descending, right? So the newest snapshot. And then I can ask my system for that information, right? And I'm going to go ahead and read that data against the protection group snapshots endpoint and then run that code. Do a bunch of error checking. We'll pull out the tags. Once I have the latest snapshot, I'm going to read the rest of the metadata tags out. So it will require a second round trip. The first round trip is like, hey, flash array, what's the latest protection group snapshot? The second round trip is give me all of the tags. All right. So we're doing that there. Very cool. And then I have a bunch of code to shred the JSON results to read the data back. And so let's go ahead and just jump to the results, Ben, and I'll go ahead and run this code. So now what we have is the latest snapshot by SQL Server name by database. All right, we're speaking the language of the DBA. So I can now go and restore this snapshot if I want to on the system. I also know where the backup file is. And so the very last line of code here, I'm actually reading the backup header. So if I scroll down a little bit in my result set, there's the backup header. And so now I can go and perform the storage operation of restore snapshot for 105 because I now know exactly where that database is by name, by date, right? And so very kind of closing the gap between the storage operator and the database administrator. What do you think?
I mean, this is pretty cool. I'm still confused how as we've learned 2 weeks ago, every single Stack Overflow post by ID, but you need a REST API to find your snapshots. But no, in all seriousness, nice.
Yeah. And to be clear, like you don't have to have a pure storage flash array to do this. You could do this in Azure and things like that. Just kind of coordinate these capabilities. One of the things that I've seen that I do kind of in other demos is we'll take the URL of the snapshot or URI, excuse me, of the snapshot and stick it in the backup header as a label because you can stick labels in the backup headers too. So you kind of have like a dual pointer system. Like this points to the backup file on the snapshot, and then the backup file points back to the snapshot. So you can kind of get that redundancy there.
Nice.
So Ben, let me ask you, if I can do this with name, database, replicate between 2 arrays, potentially 3 arrays, potentially between 2 different types of storage.
I'm very afraid what's happening now. But ask the question,
start
whatever it's going to be.
Does this start to look like backup?
We're getting there.
We're getting there. Yeah, just to be clear, like this facilitates for super fast restores, right? When we're using storage operations to facilitate for these things. I will always advocate for both. Like I will always take full backups, but using regular native backup methods for other reasons, maybe like data archiving and things like that. But definitely this can facilitate for immediate restores on systems that we have.
Good stuff.
All
right.
Shall
we play the music?
Yeah, we probably went a little long in this one, so let's cut everybody loose as fast as we can, Ben.